Are you struggling to find space to grow things such as greens, lettuce, herbs, and strawberries? In this video, I'm going to review these stacked vertical planters that can work well if you have limited space to grow food at home. I will cover some of the benefits of growing in a hanging planter like this one and a few of the drawbacks. Welcome to Healthy Fresh Homegrown, the YouTube channel for families that want a more thriving, healthier lifestyle by growing food at home. I'm Mark, a published author of 2 gardening books with over 15 years of experience growing food for my family at home. And I'm here to help you put healthy, fresh, homegrown food on your family's table too. If that's something that interests you, please consider subscribing below. So the problem that most beginner gardeners face is a lack of space, especially if you live in an apartment and just have an apartment balcony, or you rent and can't actually use the full backyard garden and are needing to only be able to grow in containers. But with traditional containers, the problem is, where do you put them? So the solution is to think vertically and to actually grow vertically. And these stacking vertical planters are the perfect solution to grow a lot in a smaller footprint. So these planters consist of 3 tiers with a chain that goes through the bottom all the way through so you can hang it on top. Now, not all of these types of vertical stacking planters actually have the chain. Some can be retrofitted with a chain, while others you would just place on the ground. But if you are placing them just on the ground, then you need to be careful that a strong wind doesn't blow them over. So one downside to these planters is that the actual planting area is fairly small and they are fairly shallow. So you do need to pick the right plants for these, and what I recommend is using shallow rooted plants. In the vegetable family, that would be things like greens, lettuces, and such. And for herbs, you want to try using some of the smaller herbs, maybe basil, oregano, thyme. And then for fruit, as I have here, strawberries are the best for these types of planters. So you can't grow things that require a lot of depth, such as tomatoes and root vegetables, and even some of the larger brassicas such as broccoli and cauliflower, and even kale. Although with kale you can actually grow them and harvest them when they're still young, so they're a little bit more tender than fully mature kale plants, which won't get big in this planter anyways because they don't have the space. In a later video, I will actually get some more of these planters and plant them up with herbs and greens, probably in the spring, to just show you the other ways that you can grow in these planters. So for planting into them, I recommend a good quality organic potting soil, just like you would use in other containers. You may want to ensure that that potting soil has some kind of either coconut coir or peat moss. You don't want the soil to be too dense because you do want them to be able to drain, especially after the rain that we had the last 2 days, where these planters are now quite saturated with water. And when you fill them up, you do want to make sure that you leave a little bit of space on the top to allow for when you water so that the soil doesn't spill over the edge. And also, if you're mulching, these ones happen to be mulched with pine shavings, or if you're using a leaf mulch or some additional compost on top, you want to leave a bit of space for that as well. And over time, you'll want to replace the soil as well once it gets depleted with new soil, and especially if you end up with any kind of soil diseases, you can just empty the planter, wash it out a little bit with a light bleach and water solution, and then put fresh new soil in. For the plants themselves, you can either go the route of buying transplants or seedlings at a nursery and planting them in. That'll make for a almost instantaneous planter. Or you can go the route of actually seeding your own plants, maybe indoors, and then planting them into the planter once they're mature enough for transplanting. The other thing you can also do is, if you've got a greenhouse such as mine, you can actually move the planter in there in the early spring when the weather outside might still be a little bit too cool, and direct seed into the planter. And then once the plants have started growing and the weather has warmed up, then you can move it out here into the open. So before I talk more about the benefits of these planters, let me know down in the comments below what kind of containers or planters you're currently using and how much space you actually have to grow. So again, these do save space in the sense that you can hang them up, and you've got lots of vertical growing space, but just keep in mind that this bottom part here is not that usable in terms of actually walking underneath it and such. You can hang them higher, but then that would mean that it's very hard to plant them, to water them, to harvest and such. So you want to have them at sort of this height so that you can easily reach them. So the other thing that you can do is you can use the space underneath for additional containers or planters like I show here. So this is in front of my daughter's raised planting bed. And then this planter here is hanging above some planters that contain zucchini plants. And then the other key critical thing that's really important for safety reasons is to make sure that you have a good strong hanger attached to a very solid attachment point with the right kind of hardware so that this heavy planter doesn't come crashing down. Once the planters are filled with soil and with plants and well watered, they get really heavy. In fact, I probably can't move this one right now because, as I mentioned, we had lots of rain and this planter is totally saturated with water, so having to move this right now would be very, very difficult. For me, I chose the posts in my greenhouse and I used the strong metal hanger, well supported by long screws that are screwed directly into the framing of my greenhouse. And if you live in an apartment and want to hang these up, maybe check with your landlord and see where you can actually screw into. The problem with just screwing into a wall or a ceiling is that you might not actually be screwing into an actual structural member, and again, this could come crashing down. You also don't want to hang it somewhere where it could come crashing down a few flights. If you're in an apartment building on, let's say, the 3rd or 4th floor, you don't want to have it happen where if the chain, let's say, breaks or the hanger breaks, that it comes crashing down, to the ground floor and hits someone on the head. That would not be good. So don't hang it over the edge of a balcony railing, for instance. And like I mentioned, worst case is you can still put this somewhere on the floor and just use it as a standing planter without actually hanging it up. And some of the planters actually don't come with any way to hang them up, so that's a good way to utilize those. So then the other really good benefit of these planters is hanging them up means that slugs and snails generally don't have easy access to them. This is especially important for things like strawberries and things like greens, where slugs and snails, especially if you're in a wet climate like we are, where we have very wet winters and even early spring, the slugs and snails can't reach these, whereas they would very easily be able to reach your plants if they're in the ground, or even if they're in regular containers sitting on the ground. So another benefit of having them hanging vertically. And then the other thing is you also protect your plants from certain diseases, things such as mildew and rot and so forth. So having them hanging up and getting enough air circulation around them helps to make sure that the leaves dry quickly after a rain, and that you don't get problems with especially things like strawberries, where the strawberries rot before you have a chance to pick them. And the other benefit is that they're very accessible. They're at a really great height to plant them, and then to actually take care of them, and to actually harvest. And having them at eye level also makes it easier to spot things like pests, diseases, weeds, such as this one that I can just pull out easily without having to actually stoop down and work on your knees like in a traditional container or in a raised bed. One of the disadvantages of these containers is that getting a full watering can way up here to actually water them is difficult. So what I would recommend you do is to use a smaller watering can such as this one, and then that way you can more easily water the top tier. And the good thing with these planters is that the water will actually drip down through holes that are located in each of the tiers to the following tier. So you just need to really water the top tier, although I'll sometimes water the bottom, the intermediate ones as well. And all the water will be captured in the drip tray at the bottom. And while you're watering, of course, you can also use a liquid fertilizer, maybe about once a week or so. And I've done another video that I'll have a link to up here on how to actually use a liquid fertilizer and to mix it up and to apply it to your plants. Before I talk about a couple of the disadvantages of these planters, I just wanted to make a quick mention of Seed to Table, which is the membership for families who are growing food at home. Get the in-depth information and support that you need to create a thriving food garden for your family that fits into your busy lifestyle. Learn more by watching the Seed to Table tour that I've linked to here. So as I mentioned, these are extremely heavy. Probably can't move this one right now because it's so heavy. So if you're planting them up and you're doing this, let's say on the ground, or let's say on a potting bench or somewhere, don't water them until you've actually hung them up. And if for some reason you need to move them, give it maybe a day or two without any watering to allow the planter to dry up a bit before you actually move it. And then just remember to water it immediately after you've moved it to keep your plants well hydrated. And then the other thing is that if you are hanging them against a wall like this, then there is a tendency for the plants in the back not to get enough sunlight. So what you'll want to do is occasionally just rotate the planter maybe 90 degrees and then 180 degrees, or just 180 degrees, and that'll allow the plants in the back to get full sunlight and be able to thrive. So just remember to do that maybe once a week. That's probably enough. And the other thing is that these can be quite expensive depending on how many tiers, and if you're getting good quality ones with good quality plastic, they will cost more. I was lucky to get these at a steep discount at a local nursery when they had kind of a spring garage sale. So I got 2 of these for basically the same price as I probably would have had to pay for one. You can shop around a bit, and if you're lucky you might find them on special. The other thing that you can do is, if you cannot find them locally or you can't find the type that you really want, I'll leave some links down below in the description for ones that you can also purchase online. So as you can see, these stacking vertical planters are quite useful, especially if you don't have much space and you want to grow a lot. And for more ideas of what types of containers you can use, check out this video where I show you 5 different types of containers that I use. Even when I have extensive raised beds, I still grow some things in containers. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.